Have you ever laughed at something simply because everyone else seemed to laugh first? Have you ever dismissed a sound, a culture, or a tradition without realizing that the dismissal said more about you than about what you were judging? For a long time, there has been an unspoken assumption floating quietly through the global music world that true sophistication belongs to Europe, that real mastery is born in concert halls with chandeliers, not in villages by the sea, that instruments carved from wood or shaped by hand, passed down through generations, are charming at best and laughable at worst. It was within this invisible atmosphere that a Swedish musician named Elias stepped onto a podcast stage. He was not a nobody. In his country, he was known for his technical brilliance, his formal training, his sharp opinions about what music should be. When the conversation turned to world music, someone played a short clip of traditional Filipino instruments. The metallic pulse of the Kulintang, the deep resonance of indigenous strings, rhythms that did not ask permission to exist. Elias smiled, then laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, but confidently. He called it simple. He joked that it sounded like something anyone could play after a few drinks. The room laughed with him. That is how mockery often survives, not through hatred, but through agreement, through the illusion that everyone already thinks the same way, through the comfort of belonging to the majority voice. No one challenged him. No one paused to ask what centuries of history were being brushed aside in that single sentence. The clip went online, and within hours it traveled far beyond Sweden. It reached people who had grown up with those sounds, not as entertainment, but as memory, as prayer, as identity. At first, it seemed like just another moment that would pass, another casual insult in a world overflowing with them. After all, who listens when indigenous cultures are laughed at? Who stops scrolling? But something unexpected happened. Filipinos did not respond with anger. They did not shout. They did not beg for respect. Instead, they did something far more dangerous to arrogance. They played. Videos began appearing quietly at first. A grandmother striking the Kulintang with eyes closed, every note precise and alive. A young musician explaining how rhythms mirror the heartbeat during prayer. A small group performing in a modest space, the sound filling the room with a depth that could not be laughed away. These were not reactions fueled by outrage. They were offerings. Calm, confident, unapologetic. Elias noticed the comments changing. At first, they defended him. Then they questioned him. Then they challenged him. Not with insults, but with performances so grounded, so undeniably human, that dismissing them required something stronger than ignorance. It required denial. What began as a joke was quietly becoming something else, a mirror, and for the first time, Elias was forced to look into it and ask a question he had never considered before. Elias did not respond at first. He told himself it was noise, internet noise, the kind that fades if you simply refuse to feed it. He went back to his routine in Stockholm, back to the familiar order of rehearsals, sheet music, clean studios where every sound had a name and every name had a theory behind it. This was the world that had shaped him. From a young age, he had been trained to believe that mastery came from structure, from institutions that knew better than tradition ever could. Folk music, indigenous rhythms, oral transmission. These were interesting footnotes, not foundations. Yet something felt different this time. The clips kept appearing, not just comments, but videos. Long performances recorded in living rooms, courtyards, small community halls. No stage lights, no applause cues, just people playing as if they had been doing so long before anyone thought to record them. Elias clicked one video out of irritation, another out of curiosity, then another without realizing he was searching. What unsettled him was not the skill alone. It was the calm confidence. No one was trying to prove anything. No one addressed him directly. They were not playing for validation. They were playing because this was what they did, because this was who they were. And slowly, an uncomfortable thought began to surface. Elias had spent years chasing recognition across Europe, applying to residencies, competitions, grants. He had been praised, yes, but always measured, always compared, always evaluated. These musicians seemed free from that weight. His mind drifted back to his own past. The pressure of conservatory halls, the constant correction, the unspoken hierarchy of whose music mattered more. He remembered moments of burnout, the quiet fear that perhaps he was only good because someone else had told him what good sounded like. He had tried teaching workshops in Germany, collaborating briefly in Japan, even a short stay in New York. Everywhere, the same language of prestige followed him. Innovation, branding, relevance. And everywhere, the same exhaustion waited at the end. The Filipino videos felt like a contradiction to everything he had been taught. The rhythms were complex without being rigid. The timing was fluid, but never careless. More importantly, the musicians spoke about their instruments as if they were family members, as if sound itself carried responsibility. Elias began reading comments written by Filipinos living abroad, sharing how these sounds reminded them of home, of church gatherings, of grandparents long gone. This was not nostalgia packaged for tourists. This was living memory. One night, unable to sleep, Elias paused on a video filmed in Manila. A small ensemble sat close together, barely speaking. Before playing, one of them whispered a short prayer. Not for perfection, not for fame, just gratitude. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He could not explain it, but the music no longer sounded simple. It sounded heavy with meaning, and for the first time since that careless laugh, a quiet question formed, one he could no longer ignore. What if the Philippines held something he had lost without realizing it? Elias did not plan the trip the way people usually plan a journey that will change their life. There was no announcement, no dramatic declaration. He told friends he needed inspiration, a break from the endless cycle of performances and critiques. When his plane descended over Manila, what struck him first was not the noise or the traffic, but the density of life. The city felt awake in a way he was not used to, as if every corner carried a story already in motion. He arrived with skepticism carefully packed inside him. Years of training do not disappear simply because curiosity knocks. On his second evening, he was invited to a small gathering in a modest hall behind a church. No posters, no tickets, no program notes. People sat close together, some holding instruments, others simply listening. Elias expected an introduction, an explanation, perhaps even an apology for the simplicity he once mocked. None came. Instead, the music began quietly, almost cautiously, as if asking permission to exist. Within minutes, Elias realized he was listening differently. The Kulintang did not behave like the percussive patterns he knew. It breathed. The players watched each other closely, adjusting without words, moving as one body. In Sweden, precision had always meant control. Here, precision meant trust. Each pause felt intentional. Each strike carried weight, not volume. Elias noticed his shoulders relax, his thoughts slow. This was not performance. This was presence. Over the following days, he traveled beyond Manila. In Cebu, he met young musicians who studied theory by day and practiced tradition by night. They spoke openly about faith, about how music was often offered during moments of loss or celebration, never separated from life itself. One student explained that playing was a form of service, not self-expression. The idea unsettled Elias. His entire career had been built on standing out. Here, the highest honor was to blend in. One afternoon, an elderly musician placed a kujapi into Elias's hands. The wood was warm, worn smooth by decades of use. No instructions were given. Elias hesitated, then tried to apply familiar technique. The sound was stiff, lifeless. The old man smiled gently, not in judgment, but in understanding. He demonstrated slowly, allowing silence to exist between notes. Elias followed, awkwardly at first, then more naturally. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about correctness. He was listening. That evening, Elias sat alone, replaying the day. The frustration he once felt toward these instruments had vanished, replaced by something heavier: humility. He began to understand that his laughter had come from fear of what could not be categorized, graded, or controlled. In the Philippines, he was encountering music that refused to be reduced. And as that realization settled in, Elias felt a quiet shift within himself. Not yet joy, not yet certainty, but the undeniable sense that something long dormant was beginning. Elias stopped counting the days sometime after his third week. Time in the Philippines did not move the way it did back home. It did not rush him forward or measure his worth by productivity. It unfolded. Mornings began with shared coffee and quiet conversation. Afternoons filled with practice that felt less like rehearsal and more like communion. Evenings often ended in prayer, not because anyone demanded it, but because gratitude naturally found its way into sound. What surprised him most was how little anyone asked of him. No one pushed him to perform. No one tried to impress him. He was simply invited to be present, to sit, to listen, to learn at the pace his heart allowed. Children gathered around him during sessions, watching his hands as he struggled and improved. When he missed a rhythm, they smiled. When he found it, they nodded, as if welcoming him rather than evaluating him. One Sunday, he joined a small community outside the city. The chapel was simple, open to the breeze. Instruments rested beside the altar, not as decoration, but as offering. Before the music began, a woman whispered a prayer for those who were tired, for those who felt lost, for those carrying unseen burdens. Elias felt the words settle into him like weight and warmth at the same time. When the instruments joined in, something inside him cracked open. He realized he was no longer listening as a critic. He was listening as someone being held. The Kulintang rang out, steady and alive, echoing against walls that had known generations of hope and hardship. Faces around him glowed with a quiet joy that did not deny suffering, but refused to be defeated by it. This was resilience not shouted, but practiced daily. Elias thought of his own life, the constant striving, the subtle loneliness hidden behind achievement. Here, music was not a ladder. It was a bridge. Later that night, he confessed something he had not planned to say. He spoke of his laughter, his arrogance, the careless joke that started everything. He expected discomfort, maybe distance. Instead, there was silence, then gentle understanding. One man placed a hand on his shoulder and said that forgiveness was easiest when pride had already left the room. Elias felt tears rise, not from shame, but relief. In the weeks that followed, he played more freely than he ever had. Not better in the technical sense, but truer. The instruments no longer felt foreign, they felt honest. Each note carried intention, shaped by faith, by history, by shared humanity. Elias began to understand why joy survived here, even in difficulty. It was not denial, it was devotion. One evening, as the sun faded and music softened into silence, Elias heard himself say something that startled him. He did not want to leave. Not because he was escaping something, but because he had finally found something. A place where music was not owned, but shared. Where identity was not proven, but lived. Elias eventually did leave the Philippines, but not in the way people usually leave places that change them. There was no sense of escape, no relief at returning to familiarity. His departure felt like stepping away from a fire that had warmed him back to life. At the airport, he carried no souvenirs that could explain what had happened. What he carried was quieter and heavier. A new way of listening, a new way of standing in the world. Back in Sweden, something about him felt different to those who knew him well. He played less often, but when he did, his music had softened without losing depth. He spoke less about technique and more about intention. When asked about the Philippines, he did not describe it as a place that saved him. He said something else instead. He said it reminded him of what music was supposed to be before it became a performance, before it became a competition, before it became a mirror for ego. The clip of his old laughter still exists online. People continue to find it. But now, it is often shared alongside something else. A video of Elias sitting quietly among Filipino musicians, listening more than playing. A short interview where he admits, without defensiveness, that he was wrong, that he mistook unfamiliarity for simplicity, that he once believed refinement belonged only to certain histories, certain faces, certain accents. And that belief collapsed the moment he truly listened. What happened next did not break the internet because it was dramatic. It broke the internet because it was human. People across cultures recognized the moment. The moment pride gives way to humility. The moment a nation so often underestimated refuses to argue and instead demonstrates its soul. Filipinos did not demand apology. They offered presence. They did not shout their worth. They lived it. Elias now speaks of the Philippines as a teacher, not because it tried to teach him, but because it embodied what he had forgotten. That faith can coexist with artistry, that resilience can sound like joy, that kindness does not need permission to be powerful. He often repeats one line when asked what stayed with him the most. He says the Philippines did not show him better music. It showed him better humanity. And perhaps that is the deeper story here. In a world growing louder, harsher, more divided, there exists a place that responds to mockery not with rage, but with grace. A place where history sings through instruments shaped by struggle and hope. A place that understands that dignity does not require recognition to exist. For Filipinos watching this is not about proving anything to the world. It is about remembering who you have always been. For those watching from elsewhere, this is an invitation to listen longer, to judge slower, to recognize that greatness does not always announce itself in familiar forms. Sometimes it arrives softly, in rhythms passed from hand to hand, in faith whispered before a note is played. In a nation that has learned, through hardship, how to turn suffering into song. And when the world finally listens,